The sledgehammer cracked through concrete like thunder as Marcus destroyed his own backyard pool, each swing echoing his rage. When Karen's shrill voice pierced the morning air, "I'm calling the police. This is destruction of property." He never imagined that by sunset she'd be the one in handcuffs. The twisted irony of what lay buried beneath that pool would shatter more than just concrete it, would destroy everything Karen thought she knew about her perfect neighborhood. Sent vibrations up Marcus Chen's arms like lightning, the impact reverberating through his entire body. Concrete dust exploded into the humid morning air of Willow Creek subdivision, coating his safety glasses in a fine gray powder. He paused, chest heaving, and surveyed the spider web of cracks spreading across what had once been the pristine edge of his kidney-shaped pool. 20 years, he muttered, raising the hammer again. 20 years of this damn thing. The second blow landed with even more force, and a satisfying chunk of concrete broke free, tumbling into the drained pool below with a hollow thud. Marcus had been planning this demolition for months, ever since the final divorce papers were signed, and Sarah had taken everything else that mattered. The pool was his responsibility, his burden, his choice to destroy. He was reaching for his water bottle when the familiar screech cut through the morning quiet like nails on a chalkboard. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Marcus didn't need to turn around to know who it was. At 62, she maintained the appearance of someone 20 years younger through sheer force of will, and what Marcus suspected was significant financial investment. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tennis club ponytail, and even at 8 in the morning, she wore a full face of makeup. "Morning, Karen," Marcus said without looking at her, positioning the hammer for another strike. "Don't you morning Karen me, Marcus Chen. I asked you a question. What are you doing to that pool?" The third blow sent another satisfying crack through the concrete, demolishing it. You can't just demolish a pool. There are permits, environmental, regulations, property values to consider. Marcus finally turned to face his neighbor, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour. "It's my pool, on my property." Karen's face flushed red, a color that clashed horribly with her pink tennis outfit. "Like hell you can. This affects the entire neighborhood. Do you have any idea what this kind of destruction does to property values? And HOA threats." For 2 decades, she'd made his life miserable with noise complaints. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made the neighbor's dog start barking. "I am the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and I will not tolerate this kind of the sledgehammer connected with the pool's edge again," cutting off her tirade with a thunderous crack. This time, a larger section of concrete broke away, revealing the dark earth beneath. Marcus set down the hammer and pulled off his work gloves, his dark eyes meeting Karen's furious blue ones across the fence. "It's still my pool, and I'm still tearing it down." Marcus watched her go, feeling a grim satisfaction. 20 years of her nonsense, and finally he had something she couldn't control. The pool had been Sarah's idea, symbol of their success, their arrival in the suburban middle class. He picked up the hammer again, but before he could swing, his phone buzzed a text from his daughter Emma. "Dad, are you sure about this? The pool has so many memories." Emma was right, the pool did hold memories. The pool filter, while keeping a watchful eye on them, the morning he'd found her floating face down, dead drunk and nearly drowned. The night she'd confessed the affair while they sat on the pool's edge. "I know you're angry about the divorce. This is about moving forward. You don't have to destroy it." Marcus looked at the pool, at the perfect rectangle of blue water that had seemed like such a dream 23 years ago when they'd first moved in. Back then, Willow Creek had been a new development, full of young families with big aspirations. Now half the original neighbors had moved away or died, replaced by people like Karen, who treated the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. "Like the house," he said finally. "It's the pool that has to go. Dad, Emma, I love you, but this is my decision. The demolition crew quoted me $12,000. I can do it myself for the cost of equipment, rental, and disposal." Oh. Long silence stretched between them. Finally, Emma sighed. "Just ... be careful, okay? And maybe warn the neighbors first." "I warned Karen. She's calling the police." "Of course she is." Emma's laugh was bitter. "She's been making your life hell since I was in elementary school. Remember when she tried to get you cited for the bamboo in the backyard? That was last year. After they hung up, Marcus stood in the morning heat, watching the first crack in the pool's concrete spread like a wound. Figure she could think of. He raised the sledgehammer again, and this time, when it connected with the concrete, something shifted. Not just the concrete, something deeper. The blow revealed a dark stain in the earth beneath, a discoloration. That didn't look natural. Marcus knelt and brushed away loose concrete with his hand. His blood went cold as understanding crept up his spine like ice water. This is Marcus Chen, on Willow Creek Drive. I think you need to come out here. In the distance, sirens were already approaching Karen's police complaint, bearing fruit faster than expected. But Marcus wasn't worried about permits or noise violations anymore. He was staring at what looked like the remains of a child's dress, and remembering the summer 20 years ago when little Amy Sinclair had disappeared from this very neighborhood, the same summer his pool had been installed, then the demolition crew. She had no idea that in the next few hours, the entire foundation of Willow Creek subdivision and her perfect little world was about to crack wide open. The sledgehammer slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, clattering onto the concrete. 20 years of living next to Karen's constant complaints and petty tyranny, and now this. The irony was so sharp it could cut. She'd called the police to stop him from demolishing his pool. But what the police were about to find would make a noise complaint seem like a love letter. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus began to remember things about that summer 20 years ago. Things about his ex-wife, Sarah. Things about the contractors who had worked on the pool. Things that made his stomach turn and his hands shake as the first officer stepped out of his patrol car. Detective Ray Morrison had been hoping for a quiet Saturday morning when his phone rang. 23 years on the force had taught him that weekend calls rarely brought good news, but Marcus Chen's voice carried a weight that made his coffee turn cold in his cup. "I'll be right there," Morrison said, already reaching for his keys. The Amy Sinclair case had haunted him for 2 decades, the 8-year-old girl who had vanished from Willow Creek during a neighborhood barbecue, leaving behind nothing but a pink bicycle and a community torn apart by suspicion and grief. Now, driving down the familiar tree-lined streets of the subdivision, Morrison felt the old familiar knot in his stomach. He'd been a junior detective then, eager to prove himself. The case had nearly broken him. The police cruiser was already parked in front of Marcus's house when Morrison arrived, and he could see Officer Janet Rodriguez standing with a confused expression next to what appeared to be a partially demolished swimming pool. Marcus sat on his back porch steps, his face gray with shock. But it was the woman standing by the fence that immediately caught Morrison's attention. Karen Blackwell was gesticulating wildly at Rodriguez, her voice carrying across the yard like a siren. "I don't care what he thinks he found. The man is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. Look at this destruction. This is vandalism of his own property, which affects all of our property values." Morrison approached Rodriguez first. "What's the situation, Janet?" Rodriguez lowered her voice. "Started as a noise complaint from the neighbor lady. Mr. Chen was demolishing his pool when he called in saying he'd found something. The complainant is," she glanced toward Karen, "persistent." "Persistent is one word for it," Morrison muttered. He remembered Karen Blackwell from the original Amy Sinclair investigation. She'd been 38 then, married to a bank executive, and had inserted herself into every aspect of the case with theories, accusations, and demands that the police weren't doing enough. Morrison walked over to Marcus, who looked up with haunted eyes. "Ray," Marcus said quietly, "thank God you came. Show me what you found." Marcus led him to the pool's edge where the concrete had been broken away. Morrison knelt and examined the dark stain in the earth, his trained eye immediately recognizing what civilian eyes might miss. The fabric was definitely clothing, child-sized and degraded from years underground. "When did you start the demolition?" Morrison asked. "About an hour ago." "I only made it 3 swings before." Marcus's voice trailed off. "Have you touched anything?" "Just brushed away some loose concrete." "Ray, is it? ... Morrison stood up slowly, his knees protesting after all these years. "I need to call this in, Janet. We need to secure this as a crime scene immediately and get that woman away from here." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "Crime scene? What crime scene? The only crime here is what Marcus is doing to his property." "Officer Rodriguez, I demand you arrest this man for ma'am." Morrison's voice cut through Karen's tirade like a blade. I need you to step back and lower your voice. Karen spun toward Morrison, her face flushed with indignation. Detective Morrison, what are you doing here? This is a simple noise complaint, not some major. She stopped mid-sentence as the implications hit her. Oh my God, you think this is about that missing girl? The transformation in Karen's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The righteous anger drained from her face, replaced by something Morrison couldn't quite read: fear, shock, or something else. Mrs. Blackwell, I need you to go back to your house while we process this scene, Morrison said firmly. But I was the one who called the police. I have a right to know what's happening. This affects the entire neighborhood. Morrison stepped closer to Karen, lowering his voice so only she could hear. 20 years ago, you had plenty to say about Amy Sinclair's disappearance. Lots of theories about who might have taken her. Now we might actually have some answers. And suddenly you want to control the investigation. Karen's face went white. I was just trying to help back then. I was concerned about neighborhood safety. You accused half the residents of being involved, Morrison said, including Marcus here. Funny how things work out. Behind them, Rodriguez was stringing crime scene tape around the pool area while Marcus sat heavily on his porch steps, staring at his hands. More police cars were arriving, along with the county coroner's van. Morrison pulled out his phone and called the state forensics team. This was going to be a long day, and if his suspicions were correct, it was going to get a lot longer for everyone involved. As he waited for the forensics team, Morrison found himself studying the layout of the backyard. The pool was positioned near the back fence with clear sight lines from several neighboring houses. If something had happened here 20 years ago, someone would have seen it, unless it happened during the construction. Morrison pulled out his notebook and flipped back through years of case files until he found what he was looking for. The Chen family had moved to Willow Creek in July 2003, and the pool had been installed in August, exactly 3 weeks after Amy Sinclair disappeared. Marcus Morrison called out, I need to ask you some questions about the pool installation. Marcus looked up, his face haggard. What do you want to know? Who was the contractor? Sinclair Pools and Landscaping, Marcus said, then stopped as the name registered. His eyes widened. Oh Christ, Ray, you don't think? Morrison felt the pieces clicking into place like tumbler locks in his mind. Amy's father owned a pool company. The color drained from Marcus's face completely. David Sinclair installed this pool. He and his crew dug the hole, laid the concrete, everything. Sarah handled all the arrangements. I was working 60-hour weeks back then, trying to make partner at the firm. Kieran had been quiet during this exchange, but now she stepped forward, her voice shaking. David Sinclair couldn't have. He wouldn't hurt his own daughter. That's insane. Morrison turned to look at her. Is it man's business is failing? His marriage is falling apart. His daughter goes missing during a neighborhood barbecue where he's working. 3 weeks later, he's installing a pool in the exact spot where we might have just found her remains. But why would Marcus and Sarah hire him after Amy disappeared? Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe they didn't know, Morrison said. Or maybe. He left the sentence hanging, but his eyes found Marcus, who was staring at the ground. Maybe what? Karen demanded. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. Mrs. Blackwell, where were you the day Amy disappeared? Karen's face went from white to red in seconds. How dare you? I was at home preparing food for the barbecue. I was one of the organizers. Ask anyone, I did ask, 20 years ago. You were unaccounted for between 2 and 4 p.m. You said you were napping. I was. The heat was terrible that day, and I had been working all morning on preparations. Morrison made a note in his book. And your husband? Where was Robert that day at the golf course? He had a tournament. There are records. That's right, there are. Morrison flipped through his notes. He teed off at 8 a.m. and finished at 2:30 p.m. Plenty of time to get home before Amy was reported missing at 5. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Around them, the forensics team was setting up their equipment, photographing everything before they began the delicate process of excavation. Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. The message was from the FBI's cold case unit. DNA results from Amy's bedroom came back. We need to talk. Janet Morrison called out. I need you to keep everyone back from the scene. No one leaves the neighborhood until we get some answers. As he walked toward his car to make the call, Morrison heard Karen's voice rise again. But this time it wasn't directed at the police. Marcus, you need to tell them about Sarah, about what she did that summer. Morrison spun around to see Karen pointing accusingly at Marcus, who had gone rigid on the porch steps. What about Sarah? Morrison demanded. Karen's face was wild now, desperate. She was having an affair with David Sinclair. Everyone knew it but Marcus. She was at his house all the time, supposedly discussing the pool installation. The backyard went silent except for the hum of forensics equipment. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped, and Morrison felt another piece of the puzzle slide into place. Is that true, Marcus? Marcus's voice was barely audible. I suspected. She was different that summer. Secretive. Always on the phone. He looked up at Morrison with devastated eyes. Ray, if Sarah knew something about Amy, if she was involved somehow, ... Where is Sarah now? Morrison asked. Phoenix. She moved. They're after the divorce. Got remarried to some real estate developer. Morrison was already dialing as the forensics team began their careful excavation of the pool area. In the distance, he could see more neighbors gathering at their windows and on their porches, drawn by the police activity. But it was Karen's face that troubled him most. The desperate way she'd thrown Sarah under the bus, the panic in her eyes. When he'd asked about her whereabouts 20 years ago, and something else, something that had been nagging at him since he'd arrived at the scene. Karen Blackwell lived in the house directly behind the Chen property. Her bedroom window had a perfect view of the pool area. If Amy... The FBI arrived 2 hours later in a convoy of black SUVs that transformed Willow Creek Drive into something resembling a war zone. Agent Sarah Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle with the kind of purposeful stride that made everyone, including Detective Morrison, stand a little straighter. Marcus watched from his kitchen window as his backyard filled with federal agents, forensic specialists, and enough crime scene equipment to process a small city. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd started the morning wanting to destroy his pool, and now the government was doing it for him with tweezers and dental picks. His phone had been ringing constantly, reporters, neighbors, even his ex-wife, Sarah, calling from Phoenix with a voice full of panic and denial. He'd stopped answering after the third call from Channel 7 News. Agent Martinez knocked on his back door at exactly noon. Accompanied by Morrison and a younger agent Marcus didn't recognize, Mr. Chen, I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI's cold case unit. We need to discuss some developments in the Amy Sinclair investigation. Marcus stepped aside to let them in, noticing how Martinez's eyes immediately cataloged every detail of his kitchen. The divorce papers still scattered on the counter, the empty beer bottles from last night's attempt to forget his troubles. The family photos he hadn't had the heart to take down yet. Before we begin, Martinez said, settling into a chair at his kitchen table, I need to inform you that you're not under arrest, but anything you say can and will be used in our investigation. You have the right to have an attorney present. Do I need one? Marcus asked, his mouth suddenly dry. Morrison leaned forward. That depends on what you know about the summer of 2003. Marcus sat down heavily across from them. Through the window, he could see Karen pacing in her backyard, her phone pressed to her ear. She'd been making calls all morning, and he wondered who she was so desperate to reach. I've been thinking about that summer, Marcus said slowly. Things I didn't want to remember. Things I convinced myself weren't important. Agent Martinez opened a file folder and spread several photos across the table. Marcus recognized them immediately: crime scene photos from Amy Sinclair's disappearance. Neighborhood maps, timelines written in careful police handwriting. Tell us about Sarah's relationship with David Sinclair, Martinez said. Marcus felt 20 years of willful blindness crumble like the concrete around his pool. I knew she was having an affair. I couldn't prove it, and she denied everything. But she was different that summer, excited about things, secretive. How long had it been going on? I think it started in May, when we first got quotes for the pool. David came out to do the estimate, and Sarah was ... animated. Flirty. She insisted on handling all the details herself. Morrison made notes as Marcus spoke. What about the day Amy disappeared? Where was Sarah? She said she was at the barbecue helping set up. But I remember looking for her around 3 o'clock, and Mrs. Patterson said she'd seen Sarah leaving in her car around 2:30. Agent Martinez exchanged a look with Morrison. "Did you ask Sarah where she'd gone?" "She said she'd run home to get more ice, but our freezer was full of ice. I remember because I'd bought bags the night before." The younger agent, who had introduced himself as Agent Cooper, leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, we've been analyzing phone records from 2003. Your wife made 17 calls to David Sinclair's cell phone in the week before Amy disappeared. Some of them lasted over an hour." Marcus felt sick. "Planning the pool installation." "That's what we thought initially," Martinez said, "but we also found something else in David Sinclair's business records. He invoiced you for the full pool installation on July 30th, 2003, days before Amy disappeared." "That's impossible," Marcus said automatically. "We didn't pay until after the work was finished." Agent Martinez slid another document across, the tabula copy of a canceled check made out to Sinclair Pools and Landscaping, signed in Sarah's handwriting. Marcus stared at the check, his world tilting on its axis. "I never saw this. Sarah handled the finances for the house projects, but she always showed me big expenditures." "Mr. Chen," Morrison said gently, "we think your wife paid David Sinclair to bury Amy under your pool." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the linoleum. No, that's insane. Sarah might have been having an affair, but she wouldn't. She'll see OULDN, single quotes, T, ... Where is your wife now? Agent Martinez asked. "Phoenix. She remarried a guy named Tom Bradley. They have a house in Scottsdale." Marcus's voice sounded foreign to his own ears, mechanical and distant. Agent Cooper was already on his phone, presumably calling the Phoenix field office. Through the kitchen window, Marcus could see the forensics team working methodically around his pool, their movements careful and reverent as they excavated more than just concrete and dirt. "There's something else," Agent Martinez said, her voice softer now. "The DNA results from Amy's bedroom came back. We found traces of an adult female's DNA on Amy's clothes, DNA that doesn't match Amy's mother." Marcus closed his eyes. "Sarah, we'll need a sample from you for comparison and elimination purposes," Martinez continued. "But, Mr. Chen, based on what we've discovered so far, we believe Amy Sinclair was murdered by her father, with your wife's knowledge and assistance." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Marcus could hear voices in the hallway, official voices with the kind of authority that didn't ask permission. "That'll be the warrant for the house," Morrison said. "We need to search for any evidence that might connect Sarah to Amy's disappearance." As the agents filed out to coordinate the search, Marcus remained sitting at his kitchen table, staring at the canceled check. 20 years of marriage, and he'd never seen this piece of paper. 20 years of living above a murdered child, and he'd never known. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, I'm seeing the news. Are you okay? I'm driving down from Denver." He started to type a response, then stopped. "How do you tell your daughter that her mother might be an accessory to murder? How do you explain that the pool where she learned to swim was built on top of a grave?" Through the window, he saw Agent Martinez approaching Karen's house. Karen had stopped pacing and was standing at her back door, her face pale and strained. Even from a distance, Marcus could see her hands shaking. Another text came through, this one from a number he didn't recognize. "Marcus, this is Sarah. Don't talk to them without a lawyer. There are things you don't understand. Things I couldn't tell you." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then showed it to Morrison, who had returned to the kitchen. "When did this come in?" Morrison asked. "Just now?" Morrison was already signaling to Agent Martinez. Within minutes, they were tracing the message and coordinating with Phoenix to bring Sarah in for questioning. But Marcus wasn't thinking about Sarah anymore. He was thinking about Karen's face when she'd accused Sarah of the affair, the desperation in her voice when she'd tried to deflect suspicion, the way she'd lived next door to this secret for 20 years without ever saying a word. And he was thinking about something else, something that had been nagging at him since the morning. When he'd first cracked the concrete, Karen had appeared at the fence almost immediately. Too immediately, as if she'd been watching, waiting, as if she'd known exactly what he was going to find. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Karen was still standing at her back door, but now she was looking directly at him. Their eyes met across the yards, across 20 years of neighborhood small talk and property line disputes. And in that moment, Marcus saw something in Karen's face that made his blood freeze. Relief, not shock, not horror, not the grief of a neighbor learning that a child had been buried next door. Relief, as if a burden she'd been carrying for 20 years had finally been lifted. Marcus grabbed Morrison's arm. "Ray, I think we've been looking at this all wrong." "What do you mean?" "Karen, look at her face. She's not surprised by any of this." Morrison looked out the window, and Marcus saw understanding dawn in the detectives. "AIS, Jesus," Morrison whispered. "She's been waiting for this day for 20 years. At that moment, Agent Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. "We have a problem. Sarah Chun Bradley was found dead in her Phoenix home this morning. Apparent suicide. There's a note." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. Through the window, Karen was still watching them, and now she was smiling, not the vindictive smile Marcus had seen so many times over the years. The satisfied smile of someone whose secrets were finally safe. Sarah's suicide note arrived by courier at 3:47 p.m., hand-delivered from the Phoenix FBI field office with the kind of urgency that made Agent Martinez's jaw tighten as she read it aloud in Marcus's living room. "I can't live with what I've done anymore. David Sinclair was a broken man when his business started failing, and I took advantage of that. I seduced him, manipulated him, made him believe that getting rid of Amy would solve his problems. The custody payments, the pressure from his ex-wife, everything. I was there when he did it. I helped him plan it. I paid him to bury her under our pool because I knew Marcus would never look there, never suspect. Marcus didn't know. Emma didn't know. Please don't let them suffer for my sins." While the federal agents processed what appeared to be a complete confession to conspiracy in the murder of Amy Sinclair, "Well," Agent Martinez said finally, "that seems to wrap things up." But Detective Morrison was frowning, tapping his pen against his notebook. "Something doesn't feel right about this." "What do you mean?" Agent Cooper asked. "She confessed. She killed herself out of guilt. Classic closure pattern for cold cases." Morrison stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The forensics team had been working for hours, and they'd recovered what appeared to be a complete skeleton, along with remnants of clothing. Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "The timeline," Morrison said. "According to this note, Sarah manipulated David Sinclair into killing his own daughter. But I knew David. He was a good man going through a rough patch." The idea that he could be manipulated into murdering Amy, Morrison shook his head. "And there's something else." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "What?" "I've been reviewing my notes from the original investigation. Karen Blackwell was the one who kept pushing us to look at David. She's the one who told us about his financial problems, his custody issues, his drinking. She painted a picture of a man on the edge." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You think Karen was involved?" "I think Karen orchestrated the whole thing," Morrison said bluntly. "Look at the facts. She had a perfect view of your backyard. From her bedroom window, she knew about the pool installation. She knew David was vulnerable. And she's the one who kept deflecting suspicion away from herself for 20 years. Agent Martinez was already pulling up files on her laptop. What was Karen's relationship with the Sinclair family? Morrison flipped through his notes. "That's what I've been trying to remember. Karen was the neighborhood busybody, but she had particular interest in David Sinclair. She was always calling the HOA about his work trucks parked on the street, complaining about noise from his crew." "Sounds like typical neighbor disputes," Agent Cooper said. "No," Morrison said, his voice gaining conviction. "It was more than that. She was obsessed with him. I remember thinking at the time that she seemed to know an awful lot about David's personal business, his divorce. So she would have known exactly when Amy would be unsupervised. She would have known when David would be distracted by work. She could have planned the whole thing." Agent Martinez was typing rapidly on her laptop. As the agents worked, Marcus found himself remembering conversations. With Karen over the years, her obsession with property values, her need to control everything in the neighborhood, her particular hatred for families with children who made noise, left toys in yards, disrupted her perfect suburban vision. "Jesus," Agent Martinez said, staring at her screen. "Karen Blackwell was married to Robert Blackwell from 1995 to 2005. They divorced 2 years after Amy's disappearance. Reason listed was irreconcilable differences, but there's a sealed court file. Can you unseal it?" working on it. Martinez made several phone calls while Morrison paced the room like a caged animal. Outside, Marcus could see Karen standing in her backyard, arms crossed, watching the FBI forensics team work. Even from a distance, there was something predatory about her posture. "Got it," Martinez announced. The divorce file mentions Robert Blackwell's testimony that his wife had become obsessed with neighborhood children and had made several disturbing comments about wanting to clean up the riffraff in Willow Creek. What kind of comments? According to Robert's testimony, Karen specifically mentioned the Sinclair family as lowering property values and said she wished they would just disappear. The room went silent except for the sound of Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "There's more," Martinez continued. Robert also testified that Karen had been having what he called inappropriate contact with David Sinclair, including showing up at his house uninvited and making what David described as unwanted advances. Agent Cooper looked up from his own laptop. "I'm seeing something interesting in David Sinclair's business records. 3 weeks before Amy disappeared, someone made a large cash deposit into his business account, $5,000, with no corresponding invoice or client record," Marcus asked. Morrison was already heading for the door. "We ask her." Marcus followed the agents out of his house and across the yards to Karen's property. She was still standing in her backyard, but now she looked like a cornered animal. Her perfectly styled hair disheveled and her makeup smeared. "Karen Blackwell," Agent Martinez called out. "We need to speak with you." Karen's response was immediate and telling. Asked, stepping closer. "Waiting for us to figure out what you did." Karen's laugh was bitter and sharp. "What I did? I cleaned up this neighborhood. I removed a problem that was bringing down all of our property values." The casual admission hit like a physical blow. Agent Martinez immediately began reading Karen her rights, while Agent Cooper called for backup. But Karen seemed almost relieved to finally be talking. "Amy Sinclair was a noisy, disruptive child from a broken home," Karen continued, her voice gaining strength. "Her father was a drunk who couldn't control his business or his family. They were exactly the kind of people who ruin neighborhoods like this." "So you killed her?" Marcus asked, his voice barely controlled. "I solved a problem," Karen corrected. "David Sinclair was easy to manipulate. A few flirtations, a little cash when his business was failing, some suggestions about how much easier his life would be without custody payments. Men like David are weak." And Sarah Karen's smile was cold. "Sarah was greedy and stupid. She thought she was seducing David, but I was pulling all the strings. I made her believe the affair was her idea." "You've been blackmailing them for 20 years, Agent Martinez said. "I've been ensuring their silence. Sarah's little affair gave me everything I needed to keep them quiet. If David ever talked, I'd tell his ex-wife about the affair. If Sarah ever talked, I'd tell Marcus about the affair and make sure she lost everything in the divorce." Marcus stared at the woman who had been his neighbor for 2 decades. "You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my family. I protected this neighborhood," Karen said firmly. "We're placing Karen in handcuffs when she turned to Marcus with one final revelation. "You want to know the really beautiful part?" she said, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Sarah never actually touched Amy. David did it alone. After I convinced him it was the only way to save his business and his life. But Sarah was so consumed with guilt over the affair that she convinced herself she was responsible. She's been living with guilt for a crime she didn't even commit." The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah had killed herself over guilt for something she hadn't done, manipulated by Karen even in death. As they loaded Karen into the police car, she called out one last time, "You should thank me, Marcus. I gave you 20 years in the best neighborhood in the city. Your property value alone should cover Amy's life." The car door slammed shut, cutting off her voice, but the echo of her words hung in the air like poison. Marcus stood in his backyard, surrounded by crime scene tape and the remains of his demolished pool. Finally understanding the true cost of his perfect suburban life, Karen Blackwell had orchestrated the murder of a child, manipulated 3 families into destroying themselves, and maintained her perfect neighborhood image for 20 years.